So thanks everyone for joining us today and welcome. My name's Katie Matthews. I'm the North Highland Community Sport Hub Officer and Project Group Rep.
Yeah, and I'm the other Project Group Rep, Paul Hush, East Lothian Club and Community Sports Development Officer. And I have the lucky part to this start of the podcast to introduce three of our guests. Ross Taylor, Community Sports Hub Coordinator from Angus Live. Audra Booth, North Community Sports Hub Officer from Live Life Aberdeenshire. And Jonathan Wallace, Community Sports Hub Development Officer from City of Edinburgh Council. Welcome aboard, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on your show.
Problem. It's great to have you. So today's podcast theme is inclusive by design, and obviously we've invited you guys along to share your experiences around the areas of the work that you've been taking an inclusive design approach and providing insight and tips and advice to the wider Community Sports Hub network and beyond on your experiences to date.
Well, I guess everyone here and also any Community Sport Hub officers listening to today's Let's Talk podcast will be familiar with the Changing Lives approach, which is all about using sport and physical activity as a tool for positive change to support a sport for life strategy. And inclusive design in sports development really refers to purposefully and proactively creating programs, policies, as well as the environments that are welcoming and are going to cater to the needs of people who've got a diverse, who come from diverse backgrounds, have different abilities, genders, races, ethnicities, and also socioeconomic statuses. And it's very much with the goal to ensure that everyone, regardless of their differences, has got that equal access to and opportunities within the wider sporting system. So where do we start today? Stories, obviously. We're as hub officers, we're all very familiar with telling stories of the work that we do and the people we get to work with in our communities. So they can be real motivators and provide those real life examples about how inclusive design can positively impact people's lives and reinforce why it's so important in our roles as Community Sport Hub officers. So earlier this week, we caught up with Ata Yukib, who is Sport Scotland's EDI manager, that's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion manager, to hear about his personal experiences related to inclusive sports development and how that has really inspired him and influenced him throughout his life and in his current role.
We're here with Ata Yukib from Sport Scotland, lead manager of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. So thank you for joining us, Ata. And the main topic theme of this week's or this month's podcast is inclusive design or inclusive by design. So it's really looking at and discussing the kind of intentionality about including those the needs of people who experience exclusion in many aspects of their daily lives throughout our kind of design process, what that actually means, and obviously in more detail specifically to you, Ata, is your role and how you're supporting Sport Scotland, us hub officers, and the wider strategy on delivering a more inclusive approach and making sure that we have that changing lives approach and that impactful approach to the wider communities that we may or may not be engaging just now.
Great, thanks, Ata. So most of our Community Sport Hub officers who will hopefully pick up on this podcast will be familiar with the Changing Lives approach, which is very much about using sport and physical activity as a tool for positive change and supports a sport for life strategy. So one key element of the Changing Lives approach is being inclusive by design. So I wanted to just start with why inclusive design is so important to sport and the physical activity sector.
I think inclusive by design is important to the sport and physical activity sector because ultimately it shows us the fact that communities and society is changing. we as people who work in sport, as part of our job and a part of our remit, and as human beings, we need to allow and enable people of all backgrounds to take part in activities and without fear, and in order to make it fair and equitable, so that sports provision, whether you're playing it recreationally, whether you're playing it through a pathway, that everything that we look at everything as with fairness, with equality, and giving people that opportunity. So inclusive by design is imperative to sport and physical health and well-being, because if we're not doing that, then we're missing out big chunks of people, and those chunks of people could be around those protected characteristics that we'll no doubt speak about. But if we can highlight some in terms of our strategy, race and ethnicity, those with disabilities, female, working with those with mental health challenges, our reach can be so much wider, and then people that we have playing in the game, the numbers that we have playing in the game, will ultimately grow as well. And if I can give a quick example, Katie, if that's okay, just because I used to work at the Scottish FA a few years ago, and one of the big things for us was growing the game. How do we grow the game? How do we get more numbers? And I remember going in as an equity officer at the time, and we kind of started with a blank canvas. So I would urge community sport hub officers to not feel threatened or worried, because we don't have all the answers. Sports don't have all the answers. But what we can do is take a few learnings from myself and from each other around, firstly, how do we engage? How do we build that trust and relationship with communities? How do we knock on the doors of those that are perhaps within our area but are not participating in sport? Because trust me, somewhere there will be, but it's about us doing a little bit of that outreach, working with some partners to find out who and what they are, because we won't have all those answers. But then ultimately, when we do find some of that, we've built a little bit of a trust and relationship. It's about actual action. What do we do next? And for me, what worked with the SFA, and still I would encourage, is we need to have a little bit of bespoke activity. Now, people listening in might say, yeah, but bespoke activity just separates people. Where's the integration in that? Where's the working together in that? And I would say some of that bespoke involvement or physical activity allows people to build that trust and relationship. It gives the communities a place, be it a facility, be it a coach coming in from the network, whatever it is. We start to develop those groups. We allow them to understand what pathways are, because a lot of these communities, be them asylum seeker, refugees, won't know what those pathways are, what volunteers do, what coaches do. And we started to build that rapport and that development with them. And then by doing that, we started doing bespoke sessions, some tournaments that were bespoke. And then we came to a point, Katie and Paul, that we thought, okay, we've taken this to where we can. What's next for this group? Do we go standalone with them and say, look, they're now they've got the governance and the structure to become standalone and develop themselves as a club? Or do we integrate them with a club within the area that has a bit of capacity, a bit of resource to say, look, let's bring this group in. We want to grow the game, as I said right at the start of this, but we also want to build in and bring in people that will help our club flourish. And again, this was difficult because those people within those clubs didn't have the training. If they'd seen someone who was black or brown, they wouldn't know what language to use. So we started to develop excuse me, some resources for that. And I'm not saying everyone will have these resources, but we're working with organisations like Show Racism, the Red Card. There's other organisations like Sporting Equals we're working with. So I would urge community support hub officers to say, look at where can we get some of this as well? And that kind of involvement from those clubs allowed a bit of integration, allowed a bit of that bespoke activity, and it empowered everyone in the one.
Yeah, I love that. I love the word bespoke. I think it's when I think about it, when I say it, when we talk in clubs and in the community, we talk about that kind of started small and simple, but I prefer the bespoke word. The fact is that all what you said there takes into that kind of person-centered approach, doesn't it? Where you're talking to that person, you're planning with that person, you're focusing on those strengths and abilities and skills. Absolutely. And you're learning as you go with them. And it's such a positive experience, as you said. That yes, I love the word bespoke. So what I'm going to use going forward.
And I think what Katie, what she mentioned right at the start, that inclusive by design, and I know that example probably give a bit of a practical way of what that might look like. But inclusive by design also encourages people, firstly, to go and look and map the areas. You know, how do we do a bit of a mapping exercise? Do we look at census figures? Do we look at the strategic planning team and ask them for some guidance around it? What are the local authority forums or networks that community sport hub officers are part of or could get involved with? Then within that process around inclusive by design, it's about that trusting those communities, building that trust, building that relationship, finding out what they need and when they need it. I'll give you a perfect example that, you know, I'm a Muslim, and for me, who loves sport, it was really difficult growing up playing sport because I would finish school around 4 o'clock. I'm giving my age away. They'd probably finished school a lot earlier now, right? So you'd finish school and I'd go to the mosque for 2 hours. And if you think about the way our clubs run, 4 to 6 to 7 is a ideal time for clubs to run. So I didn't get any club football or club sports at all. I got a little bit of school stuff, and I was just fortunate that I was able to go to the Boys Brigade, which ran a little bit later in the evening on some of the nights during the week, and that process of changing things, of when facilities operate or when sessions operate, is sometimes again little nuggets that we can use or we can urge our clubs to use as well. Then it's about inclusive by design, is being a bit having a bit of autonomy to do that bespoke or specific activity. It's knowing around being inclusive is around knowing what facilities offer, because timings and what timings there are, some groups or communities might not be able to use them, or how do we resource them into the schedules? And that's not always easy for hub officers as well, because they've got commitments to other clubs, and if those clubs clash with the other ones, how do we maybe merge some of that? How do we build some of the volunteers on either side? And then it's about that recruitment side as well, inclusive by design, and that's what we're trying to do. And we'll look at the strategy at Sports Scotland in a minute or two, but looking at recruitment of, you know, volunteers, of coaches potentially. Are we targeting them from specific groups? Are we going to colleges, etc.? And I know this seems like adding more work, but being inclusive means that we are trying to really reach out. And if we do reach out for that little bit of 6 months to a year, our numbers, our makeup of inclusion will definitely change.
What examples have you been involved with yourself directly, or have you seen out there, either within our sector or within other sectors, that you felt have been particularly impactful and made a real difference? Because we've been talking about that change and driving that change.
Yeah. I guess a couple of practical examples, and I'll give one from Prince's Trust, where I was education manager, and one of our programs was Achieve, and Achieve essentially was around those who weren't attaining, you know, grades or successful rates of going into further education. What was being done with them? How are we making learning for them more relevant, more interesting, more fun, in order for them to stay at school? And I guess the first thing that we did was looked at and analysed a bit of the numbers of who was taking part in these programs, and you found that majority were white, even though they were coming from some schools, for example, in the south side of Glasgow, and I'll name Bellahouston, Shawlands, Holyrood, that had huge diversity of young people, but they were of a certain community who was being part of that. So my role involved some of that, working with schools, that the relationship building. But to be fair, the relationship was already there because of the program. It was more about how do we broaden the reach of the types of young people who are on the Achieve program. And we found that, again, Holyrood, for example, has a huge asylum seeker, refugee and ethnic minorities. How do we pitch to them about what the program is? How do we involve parents? Because parents is a crucial thing. We sometimes go direct to young people without parents really knowing what the process is of sport, of any part of industry, and that was key for us to bring parents in to present to them, to say, look, we're trying to really embed this program within the school. It's having decent success rates, but the pupils being identified who would really benefit from this are not on our program. So that process of getting them on, looking at how the program was resourced, how we looked for funding to bring in new resource to change and develop the programme was key as well, Katie. So that's one example around education. And the other one is about sport, because I'm a volunteer, Katie, with an organisation called Glasgow Answer. I coach on a Sunday morning. I've been part of the group for over 20 years, and I can give you numerous examples of activities, practical, operational, that we've done. For example, holiday programs in the summer. They used to be just get people from within the community, coach up some volunteers like myself to deliver it, and that's it, a successful program. And God, how that's changed now. It's about making sure we have the right hub in order to do the activity. It's making sure that program runs and we have young people driving that program who have went through some leadership programs. It's about working with partners and governing bodies to bring in, again, Paul's favourite word now, bespoke sessions or individual sessions with them. And I've been part of seeing that develop over the last 10, 15 years. And now that the programme hosts and holds maybe 200-300 people over a 2-3 week period. It has coaches and volunteers who have come from the community, and they've developed through partners who put them through first aid courses and other level 1 courses or early learning courses. And that's a great example. But within my work at Sports Scotland, Answer are not the only one. There's the Well Foundation in North Lanarkshire, there's Boots and Beards, there's the Black Professionals Network. Thankfully, in my role, I'm kind of broadening or spreading the wings, so to speak, to make sure that diversity, especially within race and ethnicity, is as wide as possible, but we're also looking at other groups across other characteristics as well.
It's great to hear those personal stories actually from you having been a volunteer at it, because I think stories can often be such a powerful motivational motivators and a great way to really provide those tangible examples of how inclusivity can really impact sport development and change. And in terms of where you're sitting now, obviously within Sports Scotland, and actually being up at that level and having the ear of people who are really creating the strategies that we're all working to across the Hub Officer network and with other elements of our team. So whether that's active schools coordinators, youth development officers, where do you want things to be? Where do you see things going, and what do we need to do as a Community Sport Hub Officer network to help move them there faster?
Yeah, I think where I would like to see things going and where they are going, I'll probably take our Sport for Life strategy and really focus on the 3 core elements for me that are around people, systems, and new ideas. Now, the people part is all about internal. What are we doing around the learning and development of staff? I would encourage Community Support Hub officers to, not be really, if they see a training somewhere, or if there's training being provided by organisations locally or through consultants, let's hear about it, because sometimes operationally the work that happens, for me, in my opinion, having done that, is way better and far more proactive and far more productive, than some of the work you see at a strategic level. So I would encourage L&D. Within HR, we're looking at the processes around recruitment, retention, and also promotion of staff. Are we targeting groups around female and disability, etc., to make sure that where and how we recruit is as inclusive and as diverse as possible? So I would like to see that narrative change over the next 3 to 5 years. There's some great work already going on, and without going too much into detail, we realise and understand that when we do offer a job out somewhere, we're not quite getting that broad range of applicants that we should be, that's reflective of where we live in a multicultural Scotland. So that people's bit is key. That systems piece, where we all are, is for me the most exciting, because I've come from that piece as well, and that's about supporting and working closely with active school managers and coordinators and Community Sport Hub officers and managers, because that allows us to see where they're working, what mapping or geographically what communities are there, and how we can, or how I can help bridge some of that networking, how we how we change some of the design element of programs when it comes to changing lives. Scottish Sports Leadership Programme, I'm proactively involved in a lot of that as well. Not sure if my input's that good, but I'll continue to give my tokens worth. So for me, the systems piece is crucial when it comes to speaking to governing bodies around understanding what their policies are and helping them change some of their policies, and as well as with local authorities. And that systems piece is a big chunk of work that we do. And the recent relationship and contract that we've had with Sporting Equals is one thing that will really drive some of that. And I know we're still in this infancy, but I would encourage, officers in terms of community sport hubs to really look at how and where do they need that development, because we with Sporting Equals need to build allyship when it comes to local authorities and governing bodies. We need to look at and review policies. We need to also look at the work we do with those community groups and link them with our programs. And if we're not linking them with them, is at least give them an understanding. So I want to see over the next year or two, if we're holding community consultations or race conferences, I want community sport hub officers to come in and be present at them first and foremost, to do some of that networking, but also give great examples and case studies of the work that's being done already, because these groups that might be multicultural and diverse might not know of it. So let's educate not only ourselves but them as well. And the last piece, which I know we spoke a little bit about, is around new ideas. What can we do that's a little bit unique? It's a little bit out there in terms of piloting something. I know we've spoke about, Paul, the work potentially with Passion for Fusion. It's around working with asylum seeking refugees. Again, they do some great work already, but let's do something that's co-production, that's maybe six weeks to a month, or sorry, 6 weeks to 6 months, and really focus on that activity being, like I said, co-productive, something new, but also has impact on the community. And if it doesn't work, let's hold our hands up to it, because we can test and learn and fail as well. And that's where the new ideas bit of the strategy is something really exciting for me. So what I'm trying to do there is look at groups that might not be doing sport and physical health and well-being, is build those relationships, build that trust with them. But the 4 strands around that are around mental health, those over 50, those who are coming from low deprived areas, and those from diverse ethnic backgrounds. So I would urge community support hub officers right now who are listening, if they know of a group or something that we can do and develop, get in touch to say, let's go and meet them together, because I'm more than happy to come and do that and see where we can explore some of that.
Brilliant. So let's get on and let's get the conversation started. So if we're looking to embed inclusive design into our work, where do we start? And I suppose the first question I'll ask is, how can we ensure that sport and activities are accessible to individuals from diverse backgrounds and abilities, and that we're more inclusive from the outset? We know that our process around the plan, do, review will play a key part. We also know that it's about starting by having those conversations and starting small. And probably a third point to really look at is that creating that safe space. And I'm really happy to introduce again Ross, who I really want to hear more about your kind of speaking club project and what the starting points were you in that safe space. So yeah, over to you, Ross.
Thanks, Paul. Again, thanks for having me on. So yeah, I guess an opportunity to share the story of something that has been quite organic. And I suppose, like, and my very first thought when we had this conversation was this by design? But, through articulation and great discussions with you guys, it's made me feel like, yeah, I suppose it is quite reflective of that as an approach. And that all started with working alongside Voluntary Action Angus, who are our kind of TSI in the county. And I guess that really easy conversation where they said, you know what, we know of a couple of people, Ukrainians actually, who would like an opportunity to get active. They wanted to play tennis in Montrose. And I suppose the curious officer in me thought it'd be great to meet them, great to hear a little bit about how things look for them as they have moved to the area, and their kind of route map, I suppose, to accessing leisure services, but also like employment or education or housing. Just see what there is there, and if there's any kind of space for sport. So yeah, we had a really, really positive but harrowing conversation, I guess, at the same time about the real challenge that the the Ukrainian community face as they are looking to resettle in our country. So from the outset, it was really evident that, I guess first and foremost, the language barrier was something that was prohibiting them from accessing a lot of those services, which we use daily and potentially take for granted. But to someone who's gone through the trauma of war, to relocation, to having to find themselves and potentially their family back up on 2 feet somewhere new, it really struck with me, and we had a really honest conversation about what would you like and what would you need, and let's get you started, whatever it takes, which effectively became something we now call the Ukrainian Speaking Club, which honestly is such a delight to be there. It's a Wednesday night for 2 hours, and the first session we ran had 12 Ukrainians in it, and we didn't know who they were, and actually they didn't know each other either. But it was an opportunity to just have a tea or a coffee or a biscuit and a conversation, and just build a little bit of a social bond, just build a bit of a spiritedness that actually there's other people like you, there's other people like us, and we can have this conversation together and see what emerges. And yeah, I guess from that moment in time, we've now gone to deliver 24 weeks of Ukrainian Speaking Club in our kind of Montrose Sports Centre. So we've had 39 Ukrainians access that, which is awesome. And each week that structure is they come in, cup of tea and a blether, nothing's really changed from that side of things. And then they get an hour of sport to complement that in the sports centre, all at zero cost. And I suppose what's really kind of important there is the contribution of sport with other partners rather than trying to do it just by ourselves. And what I mean by that is, we've, as Community Sport Hub, sat down and said, what can our role or contribution here be? We could deliver sport, we could structure it and make it progressive and coached and yada, yada, yada. Or we could just take a moment in time and just be people and actually listen to other people and see if we can have a conversation and see if we can just learn more about where they want us to have that role, as opposed to kind of assuming it. So, our volunteers who are coaches in their evening jobs outside of their day jobs have taken on another job whereby they come and they be guest speakers and they chat about all things life, whether it's culture and shortbread, whether it's Hogmanay or whether it's the Olympics they volunteered at, and everything in between. It's been really, really nice. And that conversation allows for the Ukrainian community to converse back with us. They're building their English language skills, they're having the chance to get to know us as people and our faces, and we're working with some really strong partnerships to evolve that and make sure that what we understand of their needs, we're bringing into that space rather than just a simple signpost back out to what could be a scary community.
It's great to hear how just actually that active listening on your part, Ross, has really led to such a impactful project and almost a flip in the roles, where actually you're the person sitting in a room full of Ukrainian people living in your community speaking Ukrainian, and you're not sure what's going on. So it's actually, I think, it just shows how valuable it can be to actually let ourselves be vulnerable and put ourselves in a position where the focus is 100% on the people that we want to help and work with directly. And I guess that also looks a little bit talks a bit to the skills, as well as potentially the tools and resources you need to be able to do that. So just moving on to focus on that a little bit more, Jonathan, I know you've got a Westerhales United project, which was picked up recently in a Sports First article, and which was very much about focusing on the promotion of unity and friendship between children from different ethnic backgrounds within the Westerhales area. And that started very much through those intentional conversations as well. So what did you identify through those conversations, and what were your next steps along that journey?
Nice segue. Thank you, Katie. Thanks, Ross, as well. That was cool. First time I've heard that story. Two things that just really resonated from yours was when you said, I sat down with them and I said, oh, what do you want and what do you need and what's going on? And for me, that's become probably the main thing, like in my work, is to seek out people to speak to, and ask them what's going on, like what's going on in your community, what are you seeing, what are you doing, And that's, yeah, Katie, as you say, that's how the project in Wester Hailes started. I got in a room with Isaac and Jonathan from Passion for Fusion, spoke to them about what their charity was. Predominantly they support BME families, but it's kind of morphed into anybody that really engages with them. And they do that through sports, they do that through family work, they do it through arts and crafts and things like that. So in speaking to them, yeah, they just laid it all out to me, to be honest. They said, look, we've been in Edinburgh for a long time, in North Edinburgh, which is we do have a North Edinburgh community sport hub. But we've got so many families that travel from Wester Hailes across the city to access our services and our sport stuff. Like, we want a home in Wester Hailes. We've been trying for ages. Like, we want to get into the school, we want to get facilities here, but we can't. We're finding it really difficult to find anything. And I just said, right, okay, well, let's tackle that. There's clearly a dearth of opportunity for young people. We were speaking about mainly Black African backgrounds to access sport and physical activity, especially around football, is what they told me. They've tried to access kind of regular clubs that were in the area or slightly outside the area, who just hadn't really understood these young people's backgrounds and cultures, and they wanted to create that safe space, again, linking into Ross's project, for them to participate. So that was identified. We needed to find them a space. And I guess we did. We managed to bring in the Active Schools Coordinator, bring in the Edinburgh Leisure Manager, and have a conversation about, like, we need to support this community. Like, how can we find them space? And we did on a Friday afternoon, which was when they told us was the time that was best suited for the people that they were working with. And I guess that started the project in January of this year, 2023. But I guess that was just the beginning of it. Everything sort of snowballed from there in terms of starting that project and what it brought up.
So Jonathan, you've mentioned about those conversations, and what were some of the key barriers and needs that were identified during those conversations? And then you've also mentioned the volunteers, the organisations that were resources to you for your project work. How did you go around tackling that need and those barriers that you'd identified?
Yeah, so when we'd got them the space and got the session started, it was advertised out to the community that Passion for Fusion knew and had, but it was also advertised widely, because they were conscious that they knew a lot of families, but they didn't know, obviously, everybody in Wester Hailes. So what they ended up with was a session of lots of Black African families, but also a lot of white Scottish and white Polish that came together. And the first couple of weeks, there was a good bit of bullying, fighting, racial abuse between mostly young boys in the session, and I guess a conversation about how are things going, how have things started, what's going on from here, led us down the path of, look, we really need something more targeted. We need to start to strengthen friendships between people from the different ethnic backgrounds. We want them to learn more about each other's cultures, because in starting that session and continually speaking to Passion for Fusion, they were saying a lot of the time it's not intentional, it's just kind of what people have maybe heard or come up with, but we want to educate them. We knew from like locality planning that hate crime is an issue in Wester Hailes, and I guess this was just kind of an on the ground proof of what was going on there. So as we spoke more about, right, what can we do more targeted, where can we go from there, I was still just chatting to people in the area. It's what I do most of the time, a lot of coffee. And I chatted to the Y Project and Sass, who's our youth work lead in the area for the council. And they were talking about their sessions that they ran at a nearby community centre and how they didn't have a huge amount of diversity really within their sessions, mainly white Scottish kids, but they wanted to move into that area. And the more I chatted to both of them, I thought, you know what, there's a natural link here. There's also that project being based at the community centre was perfect. So kind of brought them together, got them to speak about why are you interested in this? What have you seen in your project? And that was great. Just kind of putting good relationships together, get people to talk about like how could you solve this problem together, and it just kind of ran from there.
I love that story when you told it earlier. I think it's such a great story, and how, as we've talked about, that whole starting that conversation and where that evolves and goes from. And I think what we see within all these impactful projects is the kind of local leadership is key to building those relationships. You know, yourself being that leader, but also those within that community that are influenced, and you get that opportunity to you or those other leaders influence the right people. And I think that probably leads us really well on to bringing Audra into this conversation as well, about how do we find the right partners, the right people to work with. And I know, Audra, yourself, you've had a volunteer leader involved in a project in Turriff Community Sports Hub through Turriff Community Sports Hub, should I say, in a walking group, and focused around working with sheltered housing residents. And I suppose for me, that shows that you finding that right person and working with them, supporting them, and really evolving that project. Really, just it's over to you to just tell us more about it, really.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great to hear Jonathan and Ross's stories as well. So yeah, Turriff Community Sports Hub, they've got a very proactive chair who does things voluntary in a number of community organisations within Turriff. And she took the opportunity to go on a health walk leader training session at the start of the year, with the possibility of volunteering at the local sports club. Through discussions at the hub, it was decided that it might be nice to get some of the older demographic of the village up active. And as Morag's father-in-law's a resident at one of the sheltered housing complexes, it was felt that that was probably a good place to start conversations. So Morag spoke with the warden, who was happy for her to discuss this with the residents, because they would make up their minds whether they wanted to go along or not, because they're in charge of their activity. And obviously they need to be asked what they would like to do. Morag also applied for some funding and managed to get some funds in for a coffee stop halfway around the walk, which for some of the participants initially was one of the most important parts. It was going for a cup of tea and a blether, and it was a very social aspect without them actually thinking that they were taking part in any physical activity. But the project has slightly evolved from there, and there are now 2 more volunteers trained, that because some of the participants wanted to go on slightly longer walks, which has been great. We did have an add-on as well, so we were successful in getting some North East Culture Collective funding, and this is a Scottish Government fund for getting artists back into work after COVID. So we managed to secure that funding, and we've got a creative practitioner for 570 hours, which covers her time and the resources as well. So we're now linking with the academy. The creative practitioner is going in there and speaking with people in there, and the pupils from the academy are going to be going on walks with the residents. The idea is then that they'll show them how to take pictures, and they're going to try and create a calendar which they can then sell to raise some funds for their other activities that they do at the sheltered housing.
Yeah, again, just another amazing listen, just to hear the evolve and the change and the dynamics with the groups, and what they maybe went on initially to do, and why they're continuing to be involved, and how that's impacted not just probably those that are participating, but that wider and how it's engaged, local communities, whether it's the coffee shop they stop off and have their buttery, or if it's something else. It's every story you've told, both Jonathan, Ross, and yourself, Audra, shows that having that conversation initially, finding that person, how much can be achieved in over time, just nurturing that, having that person-centered approach. And I think before I throw it back over to Katie, probably one point that Ross maybe never mentioned in his conversation, but I think it's of real value when Ross offered the safe space, the free facility to come in. He created that atmosphere from the word off by actually learning some of the Ukrainian language, I believe. Is that right, Ross?
Yeah, yeah, that's a nice way to put something on the spot. But yeah, we definitely we totally thought that, do you know what, it's a massive assumption that they come in and they're just going to learn our language and it's going to be totally hunky-dory. And actually to build that trust, I guess, in the community, we wanted to be seen, not just to be seen actually, but to inherently be able to just have a good, just a feeling. I can't really describe it. It's not to be able to say we can talk to such and such. It's just to have that feeling between two people that we're here for you, and you can be here for us because we want to understand you. And so yeah, I might have learned one or two phrases, but yeah, you're not Ukrainian, so you don't need to worry about that today.
That's something good about the Turriff project as well, is obviously the older people speaking with the younger the pupils. So you've got that intergenerational work. You know, they're speaking in a language that potentially some of that the children don't understand, but then they're also being able to give a little bit of a history lesson as well while they're out there and walking about, saying, "Oh, that used to be such and such, and you know, the butchers was never there before; it was round the corner." So yeah, that's been really good as well from that point of view.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on just things that both Ross and Audra have said, just kind of hit that nail on the head of how important just that listening to people is, whether it's the young people listening to the older people or Ross learning language and building a connection. Like, it's just inherently nice, isn't it, when you take an interest in somebody and speak to them. And yeah, I've never not met a person who's opened up well when you've kind of sat down and taken the time to ask them what they're up to and what do you need, and go from there. And I think that's a really cool thing about the projects that we are doing now, and it just, we're quite lucky to be in that position. So yeah, just wait to bring that up.
Has anyone, what was the main challenge? Has there been any other key issues that popped up in your project?
Yeah, I think the main thing was working with the school, because obviously the schools are really busy. You know, they're delivering lessons. Some are they're very short staffed as well at times. So you had an initial meeting with them, and they were dead keen, totally on board. But then there would be a few weeks before anybody would get back. So I think getting them involved initially, the practitioner now knows somebody within the school, so she's gone in and targeted that person who again is totally on board. And because they already have that relationship, it's been really easy to get the school now totally signed up to the project.
Ross, what about your project? What any key challenges there, and any learnings?
Aye, yeah. Do you know? I think it's been a challenge and an opportunity. I guess by building relationships just as people being people rather than officer to participant, it's allowed us to, I suppose, give a bit of freedom to some of the people who have emerged as now volunteers in this project, and it's allowed them to, I guess, help co-design would be the phrase, what this offering looks like, which is really, really nice, because I suppose it then directly reflects what we know that they want and need from us as a service or as a facility provider. But the challenge in that, I guess, is that, you know, including things like the trauma and experiences of relocating, there's a lot of pressure on the shoulders of these people, and to have only kind of one or two morags, for lack of a better term, can be quite a challenging thing. And I suppose from a welfare point of view and a well-being point of view, it's just making sure that these people have that that support from us where they absolutely need it, because they're effectively one or two joints between our world and their world. And you know, things moving two ways at pace to set this type of work up can add quite a lot of weight to that. So, but I think what it's achieved, and we've kind of gone on to back this up now, is we've demonstrated a trust in just listening, not by assuming that we know what is needed. And we've managed to successfully bring in just under £7,000 of investment from a local improvement group, to actually employ one of our Ukrainian members as a project lead for this. So, you know, we're kind of, I hope it's fair to say, putting our money where our mouth is and actually saying, we trust you guys, we want to work with you, not for you. So yeah, I think the challenge has become the opportunity, because they're such a resilient group of people that, you know, we really see a success and a future out of this, and we're looking forward to working with them.
Fantastic. And Jonathan, What about yourself? Your challenges and learnings?
I think the main challenge in this one is probably the time aspect. So that a bit of a personal challenge and realizing that it's going to take time, especially when I suppose that working towards that targeted project, it takes time because you're bringing together two different partners, and to make that successful, there's a lot of me meeting with each of them individually, then bringing them together, just getting them to know each other, build that relationship before you started to sort of weave in that I think you could be a good partnership for a project. So for me, setting a wee bit of expectation of, right, okay, that this is going to take time, but hopefully if we take this time early enough to kind of build that relationship, we're much more successful in the long run. And then the other one was, I guess, you had one charity who was very well versed in working with their community, and we were bringing in another youth work partner who didn't really have much experience with people from diverse backgrounds. So it was how we combated that, or how we dealt with that. So some really good open conversations with the Y Project staff about, and even the guys from Passion for Fusion about, no, like, I think we should take the time to do some training beforehand. Let's get in a partner who can speak to us about how we possibly deal with racist issues that come up with in our football, like in our sporting sessions, and the youth work side of things as well. So yeah, that was great, making sure we find the right partner to deliver that training as well. So yeah, always time, but do you know what? It is really fruitful at the back end now, having been relaxed enough and having the support, like luckily enough for me, to kind of take that time and build it right.
Yeah, so we've I guess we've looked then at how you've all been able to take an inclusive by design approach in your project work, and maybe perhaps not as daunting as people might think in terms of those simple starts, those just having those conversations and actually listening to the people that in the communities that we want to work in. But how do we actually know that the project work, the impacts are working, making a difference? How do we know that? What measures have you used in your projects to actually track and monitor and evaluate the progress and the change that's happened?
For us, it was like very early on, we had a really clear why are we doing this? Like there'd been that issue, and we'd identified that, you know what, we really need to strengthen relationships between the young people. We need more friendships, and we need people to understand each other's kind of backgrounds better. So having that made the outcomes quite easy, because that's basically what the outcomes were. Like we want to increase the friendships. We want to get these young people to understand each other more. And how we're monitoring that is really cool, actually. And speaking to both partners, like I was like, oh, how can we do this? And they just kind of sat down and said, well, let's just ask the young people, like, as things start and as things are going, let's ask them really clearly, like, do you feel like you're friendlier with this person? Do you feel like you're friendlier as a group? Do you feel you know more about Ross? You know about Audra? And just record that as you go throughout.
I think it's just the feedback from the sheltered housing residents and from the creative practitioner and the pupils that have been involved. It's getting the nice little stories, but it's also making sure that everybody's getting what they want, rather than back to assuming this is what you want to do. And that's why we got the additional volunteers trained, because some of the residents asked to go on longer walks. So it wasn't, we weren't just assuming that they just wanted to walk to the coffee shop and back. We asked them, did they want to go further? So I think that's really important, just asking the people involved in your project rather than just assuming.
I think from our project, I'll hold my hands up and say that we kind of entered this as a community sport hub and as Angus Alive, probably entering the unknown a little bit in terms of setting outcomes in this space. And I think that's a fair thing to say, because, and we'll never get it perfect or get it right. But actually, we wanted to know that if we can be strong enough to listen and strong enough to have that trust and that feeling among each other, other people will follow suit. And what we've found is that we've got 6 volunteers connected to this piece of work now, which shows the strength in what it is, I suppose. We've also got other services asking to come along and be part of this, and I guess the caveat there is they're kind of seen it as part of their role, maybe as much as it could be our role at times, to work in this space, which is a nice not problem, but a nice conversation to have. But out of these discussions, out of these partnerships, what we've found is we've got six Ukrainians, I guess, employed within Montrose or slightly outside of Montrose now, as a result of connecting other services in this space. And I guess we kind of define those our outcomes. We see that as a success, and we're just capturing that through content, through pictures, and through stories, a bit like what Audra and Jonathan have mentioned.
So I think focusing then a bit more on the actual impacts, and looking at how taking an inclusive design approach has led to local, organisational and national outcomes being met for you, and on that wider basis, what impacts have your projects actually had? And Jonathan, if I come to you first.
Thank you. It's a good question, because like when you pitched this to me, I'd looked at our briefing document where we'd done our kind of impacts for the individuals, and then related that to the kind of locality, and then Edinburgh business plan, and on to the Active Scotland outcomes. And like for me, I always focus so much on the individual ones, and I know a lot of us kind of love living in that space, because you do see the impact between the young people in the sessions just being friends more, walking away from the session or speaking more or asking questions about like somebody else's background and why do you do this, and oh, that's a different food, like I didn't know why, like how does that relate? And it's just stuff like that that's really cool. It makes you realize like, oh, this is really working. For me, what was really exciting, gave me energy, was that just linking local organisations as well. So 2 really cool people that I got on well with in the area but didn't know about each other, bringing them together, and now they've co-produced a project and are kind of running off and doing it with me in the background is awesome. So it's great to be able to tell that story about the impact locally. And then it's great because when you do go back to what I was saying before, you relate it to those higher level outcomes about, like ours are about being a good place to live in Edinburgh, or like your outcomes framework of supporting resilience and well-being through sport. You're like, all right, we are actually doing that stemming from those stories. So I just think that's really cool that we can still have that, but you can show how it meets wider outcomes as well.
Yeah, it's kind of the face of it, isn't it?
Yeah, good shout.
Yeah. And Audra, what about yourself? Because I appreciate there's going to be a bit more than just the residents actually being able to get their buttery and their coffee.
Well, I mean, obviously, it links back to our business plan, which was communities and partnerships and improving health and well-being within the community. But it's also the hub. They know what a community sports hub is supposed to be doing by getting everybody in the community active. So I think that, and that's the reason that that it was looked at to see what could be done, because rather than having lots of boys and girls running around a football pitch, what are we doing for the older demographic? And just seeing, I mean, one of the residents, one of the sheltered housing complexes, they have a butcher morning at 10 o'clock every Friday, and the walk happens on a Friday. So they've now had to rethink their butcher morning, or not go to their own butcher morning because they're getting a butcher bought for them elsewhere. So but they're also then integrating with people that they wouldn't normally do on a day-to-day basis, rather than just staying within the sheltered housing complex or going out for a walk. They're talking about things that have happened in the past. There may be people that have moved to the area, but there's also a lot of people that have been there for a long time. So that's been really positive in terms of them getting out and socially interacting with their local community and the children from the schools as well.
Fantastic. And then Ross, I think obviously given that you've I think you've really invested a lot in the conversations we've had in your project personally as well. So tell us if you've got any stories that represent those impacts and outcomes from the work you've done with the Ukrainians in your community.
Yeah, you know, it doesn't get any easier to talk about it. It's a nice feeling. So, you know, you think about where they've come from, and I guess there's a really unique example where a family arrived in Montrose. I think they arrived at Speaking Club in week 2, which was about 3 or 4 days after arriving in Montrose. So, for wherever they got the information from, they came straight to Speaking Club, which is a nice thought. But in all that time since July, this family, there's a little girl who, she wouldn't say boo to a goose. She wouldn't speak. She would hide behind mum, but she always brought a toy, albeit a different toy, every week to keep herself occupied. And I don't know if that's a form of safety blanket or a form of keeping herself busy when there's lots of other things going on. What could be an overwhelming setting for a child. But just a couple of weeks ago, it was so nice. She actually came up and she actually asked me how I was, and I noticed she never had a toy with her. And I said, so I responded and I said, in Ukrainian, I'll add, that's my wee piece. But I said, I'm good, how are you? And she gave me a big hug. And it was just really nice to feel that sense of, oh, do you know what? This has come somewhere for you. And maybe you've gone beyond that stage of being welcomed and introduced and feeling included. You actually maybe feel like this is your space now. It's a wonderful thing. And yeah, I shed a tear. And I won't now, but I did shed a tear. It was lovely. And it's been that way since.
Yeah, I think that sums up well. You know, we talk about inclusive by design, and we've chatted as a group already on this, and you know what that means for everyone. And sometimes there is intentionality behind it, but sometimes it's just organic, and it takes someone like a Jonathan and Audra or a Ross to work in partnership, have that conversation, and invest that time that we talk about to really create that space for those individuals. And I think what's highlighted throughout all the projects that you are doing is by taking that time, by really focusing on in and around what they need and what they want. You know, you've got a little girl at the end of it that's found her space in a foreign country and is happy to come up and give you a cuddle. And I think that's just beautiful. And I think it shows the impact that sport can have, but also by having that approach where you're really putting them at the forefront, you're embracing that diversity and you're taking it forward. So, you know, first of all, I just really want to thank all of you. I want to thank Atta, that's obviously we caught up with earlier in the week, Audra, Jonathan, and Ross for really just sharing your stories and how they came about, what you did personally within that, but also how you connected to those individuals and professionals. So really appreciate your time. Really just thought-provoking, just great learning for myself, and I'm sure Katie as well. Just listening to your experiences, it's really given me, you know, a lot of motivation to go, actually, what else can I do in my roles as a hub officer, and who else can I reach out and have those conversations with? So I really appreciate that. And just to make sure that more people are benefiting both directly and indirectly from that kind of sport and being active and taking that approach and breaking down those barriers. So yeah, thank you.